The end came pretty fast. After 14 years of civil war, the Syrian rebel of HTS and their allies deposed the hated dictator Assad after a lightning campaign. For 5 decades, the Assad family ruled Syria with an iron fist of dictatorship. Torture, random executions, a brutal secret service. Millions fled. Nearly half of Syrians had to find refuge elsewhere. And he is the face of victory. Ahmed al-Scharra, a former al-Qaida terrorist turned celebrated liberator. Can he unify a country that has been a pawn of the region's power players like Turkey, Iran or Russia for decades? We're asking, after Assad's downfall, can Syria be reborn? Hello and welcome to The Point. My panel today: Kristin Helberg, journalist and expert on Syria and the Middle East. My DW colleague, Maissun Melhem, a journalist from Syria. And Ali Fathollah-Nejad, a German-Iranian political scientist and director of the Center for Middle East and Global Order. A warm welcome to all of you. Maissun, I'd like to start with you. Can you tell us, how did you experience this pivotal night, and what did you hear immediately from friends and family?
That was a historic night. We were sitting in front of our TVs, like not able to sleep, following Live View Map app to see where the rebels were at, like every 5 minutes. And at some point, I fell asleep. I surrendered to sleep. And around 3 in the morning or 3:30 in the morning, my telephone rang, and that was my sister-in-law giving me the great, news. Bashar al-Assad is away, is not in Syria anymore. That was a moment of euphoria, something you might not experience in your whole life or once in your life. Everyone was celebrating inside and outside Syria. I know by now, in the hindsight, or maybe in the coming weeks and months, we will have some fears, and we are aware of the challenges. But at that night, at that moment, only joy, nothing else.
Kristin, were you surprised? I mean, you're looking at the region, you're looking at Syria for years and years and years. Were you surprised?
Nobody saw this coming, not even the fighters themselves. I mean, the intent of this offensive was to stop the bombing of Idlib, of their land in the northwestern part of Syria. They never imagined to conquer Aleppo, I think, and when they start marching south, conquering or entering then Hama and Homs and finally Damascus, this had a dynamic that nobody had foreseen, because this regime finally dissolved itself. And it was the Syrians themselves that overcame their fear in the end, and they just went to the different prisoners, to the party centrals, and they kind of toppled the regime, and they finalized a revolution they had started in 2011.
Ali, if we're looking at the whole region, but also at Syria itself, could you compare this? It has been compared to the fall of the wall in Germany. Is that justified?
Well, it's a historic moment for sure. It's a watershed moment for the entire geopolitics of the Middle East. We'll see how it's going to unfold, but it is a consequence of what has been going on over the last 1 or 2 years, with the unraveling of the Iran-led axis of resistance, of which Assad and Syria was a key part of it. It was a transit route for Iranian weapons towards Hezbollah, but also beyond. But after Hezbollah was extremely weakened by Israel, the HTS, had a golden opportunity to topple the Assad regime, because there was no support from, as the Assad regime had a decade ago, from the air, from the Russians, who are also involved in the war on Ukraine, but also on the ground, with, thousands of Hezbollah fighters being sent to Syria to support Assad, together with an international Shia brigades, Iranian-led, composed of Afghan and Pakistani fighters. This time around, the Iranians had even called upon the PMF, which is the Popular Mobilization Forces, pro-Iranian militias in Iraq, to come and save Assad, but they rejected the call. So, all of that would not have been possible without the historic weakening of Iran's geopolitical power in the region.
Maissun, 14 years of civil war, 50 years of Assad family rule, if you will. What has that?
Before even.
Yeah. What has that done to the country, to the people?
You might have seen the footages coming from Sidnaya prison. I think this is a very...
It's a torture prison for political prisoners.
Yeah, and that was only one prison. What this has done to the country is that this is a country where you suspect a dungeon under your feet wherever you walk around in Syria. This is a country that was, after 14 years, destructed totally economically, socially, even physically. It's a total destruction. It's almost like Europe after the Second World War. But again, this moment of joy of being liberated of this regime, of this dystopia, it gives you a great amount of power to start again and start rebuilding the whole thing, the whole country.
And the fact that they did it by themselves.
Peacefully.
It was the Syrians themselves. They did it in a very orderly way and very peacefully. This is what was astonishing for me personally, that it was with so little bloodshed, but in the end, in a very disciplined way.
And I want to add, it was surprising for me, for you, Kristin, for many, but it wasn't surprising that he's gone at the end eventually. It wasn't surprising for those who were living in the tents. I had, over the years, so many questions with people living in Idlib and, displaced in the tents. And they all believed so strongly that he will eventually be toppled. Those who suffered the most were the ones who never lost hope. This is surprising.
So Assad, the dictator, is gone, but he leaves a country in ruins. But there is a new strongman in Syria now. Let's have a quick look at what we know about him so far and about his agenda.
The villa of the Assad family looted. The regime's torture chambers stormed. The dictator Assad fled to Russia. For years, he had fought against some of his own people, aided by Iran, Russia, and the Islamist Hezbollah militia. The leader of the uprising, called Muhammad al-Chulani on the battlefield, is now using his real name, Ahmed el-Scharra. The HTS leader celebrated victory at the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, but his Islamist group remains on the EU and US terror lists. The former al-Qaida supporter presents himself as a moderate. This victory, my brothers, is a historic turning point for the entire Islamic nation. It's the beginning of a new era for the entire region. The good news, a transitional government has been named. But what exactly will Syria's future look like? What kind of state does HTS want?
So how could HTS and their leader become so influential and so powerful so quickly?
Well, what Abu Muhammad al-Jurani, or Ahmed Sharaa, what is his real name is, what he did during the last few years is to build up a government in Idlib, in this northwestern part of Syria. He did this with a lot of authoritarian rule inside. So he disciplined different militias. He kind of built them up as one front. This is why they listen very well to what he says. This is what we are seeing right now. He broke with al-Qaida. He used to be an al-Qaida leader. He broke with al-Qaida in 2016. And his aim and his goal was always to liberate or to topple the Syrian regime and not an international jihadi agenda like the terror organization ISIS, Islamic State. This is what so he was never interested in terror attacks in Europe or in the West, anywhere. So this is his agenda, and what helped him to do this is that he has this legacy in Idlib. He kind of managed well the administration of this region. So what he did when the offensive started is sending moderate messages every day. Once he was addressing the Christians in Aleppo, then he was talking to the Alawites at the coast, then he was talking about the Kurds and how everybody was part of the society and should play a role in the future. Then he talked to CNN, telling them that it's all about institutions and not about leaders. So he did everything right in these 2 weeks. He either has a very strong PR advisor or he really believes in what he says.
Maissun, do you believe that he could become a politician?
I think he could become a politician. If we look at his biography, the way he started with ISIS, and he was able then to go away from ISIS and give his loyalty to al-Zawahiri, to be affiliate of al-Qaida. And then 2016, he broke his ties with al-Qaida and started his own business in Idlib. So we are looking at a person who is very able to transform. And this is, I think, the best recipe to being a good politician, or a politician, whether good or bad, I don't know.
The US, he was in US prisons. What's his view? There's still a $10 million bounty on his head by the US. What's his view towards the West in general, the US?
I mean, there is this process of moderation, which is key to understand its changing relationships, and also the fact that he gave this interview to CNN. So he's trying absolutely to show a moderate face vis-a-vis the West, and also the US has said that they're going to remove the organization from the terrorism list if things go according to a kind of according to this moderation plan. So I think, I mean, he would be open to deal with the West and to entertain links. Yes,
he's ready to cooperate. He invites everybody to cooperate.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the other hand, and he has been very reluctant, I mean, very critical of the role of Iran, which he mentioned as the chief supporter of the brutal Assad regime. So for Iran, who is the big loser, it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to again, set foot in Syria and to have an influence there. I mean, the Iranians are the total losers in this game.
I mean, the Taliban, when they came back in 2021, they promised similar things, more rights for women and girls and all that. And now we see what actually happened. Can the same thing happen in Syria?
I mean, they are Islamists. I mean, to be moderate now and talking about multi-ethnic doesn't make him
nice Islamist.
A nice Islamist. And Islamism doesn't mean that it cannot be a democratic order in theory, But I think Syria is different from Afghanistan to a certain extent because, and I think that Al-Jolani, Ahmed Sharaa, sees the differences as well. He knows, I mean, the women are very well educated. It was a socialist country. I mean, Afghanistan used to be a socialist country. But I cannot imagine myself seeing Syrian women now being prohibited to study. And I think he knows this. My question is, can he control the radical fighters that are within his ranks? Because there are some real jihadis, there are some people who came from outside, some Uyghurs, for example, from China, and they came for a jihad. They came for jihad, and they want some kind of state, Gottesstaat, some theocracy somehow. So they might be disappointed by all this moderate talking, and then what will he do? Can he really discipline these people inside?
Let's remember... Sorry?
Yeah, the people you know, your family, your friends, your contacts in Syria, are they worried, are women worried that there could be a Taliban-style takeover?
This is a good question. They are worried, but, they also aware of the fact that Syria is different than Afghanistan. Syria is very, very diverse, not only politically, but also religiously and ethnically. And it used to be, but not after 20 years of war and then before and after Taliban. I'm talking about Syria right now and Afghanistan right now. And the good news is that HTS is not the only armed group in Syria. They have to cooperate with other strong groups like SDF and the remnants of the old regime and even the SNA and the armed groups in the south. So I think Ahmed Sharaa is also aware of that. He has to cooperate with everybody, and he has to give some kind of representation to everybody in Syria to stay in power and to build something reasonable in Syria.
So is now the time for the West to decide which group to support?
I think the West should support a process of democratization and an inclusive government. in Syria. This is the main job of the West, and I mean, there are ways to do that, because if it doesn't do so, it's also going to have negative security ramifications down the road. So it is absolutely indispensable to really push for an inclusive government, for democratic standards, for the respect of human rights and minorities, for all that. So this is absolutely crucial, and there are ways to do it. I mean, the Germans have a huge Syrian population. There are a lot of civil society organizations here who can be involved in this transitional period. The US could also do its share with not only with terrorism designations or removing those designations, but also in terms of security. And so there's a lot that the West should do, and it should push for that, because it's a historic moment, and it's going to depend a lot on the developments in Syria, how the region might be impacted on a midterm and a longer term as well.
The economy is also in tatters. The currency is in free fall, really. Is this very much a question of money that needs to be put in by the West as well?
It needs to be put in a way that will benefit the majority of the people. And this was not the case under the Assad rule, because they were using this money, this humanitarian aid. More than 16 million people depend on humanitarian aid by the UN, and it's only financed in 1/3. So there is a huge need for more money, and this should be one focus of the international community, to only support what's going on and not determine it, not trying to influence it in a way that serves their interests rather than the interests of the Syrian people. This is one very important point, rebuilding Syria, looking out for housing, land and property rights, because we have 7 million people who are displaced within Syria. These people are now going back to their homes, looking who is there, who took maybe their houses to rebuild them. This is a huge subject. And the other very important point is justice, and the feeling that whoever was responsible for these dungeons and for this huge injustice will be held accountable. And there should be, and this is a question of these days, really, because what we are seeing is that people start to take this into their own hands. People go after former leaders of prisons or secret service centers. So this is very important, the fact that they will take care to get hold of the leadership that is responsible for that. And because then you can forgive the many, many million people who were just part of the regime without having any responsibility for what happened.
What we urgently need is a way to stop the country from descending into a wave of vengeance, because it's really serious. Humanitarian aid is very crucial, but I think what Syria needs is a Marshal-Plan. Humanitarian aid won't be enough to rebuild such a destructed country. We need a serious Marshal-Plan, something similar to the thing we saw in Europe after a devastating war.
And without sending money to the pockets of some militia leaders, to make sure not to repeat what we did in Afghanistan, to really try to build up a process that is inclusive and represents everybody.
There are so many fault lines that are already visible. We've talked about some of them, and we already see fighting going on between pro-Turkish militias and Kurds. There's still no proper peace in Syria. Is this realistic, that with so many different groups trying to come to a solution and a history of civil war, that peace breaks out now?
Peace is not going to break out. Peace is a process. But I mean, Syria. I mean, it's very difficult to give you a exact answer. There's a lot of internal factors. It's a diversity of Syrian society. It's the diversity of the military factions. So a lot will depend on the balance of power and the arrangements that they may seek or may not seek. There are external powers. There's Turkey. There's Qatar. There's also Israel, who has got involved militarily now. And whose ramifications we're not sure about yet. But I mean, and another, important lesson, speaking of the West, is to understand that, all of that happened with no one really, being able to foresee it. And why it happened was that not only the geopolitical context, which was important, which I explained at the beginning, but also the vacuity of authoritarian regimes when they don't have a social base anymore, or if this social base is just composed of mafiosi structures. So, the long-held paradigm by the West to rely on authoritarian stability is perhaps a paradigm to really forget about, because dictatorships may not be as stable as they pretend to be because of various socioeconomic and political problems. So this is a absolutely lesson to be learned, if not after the outbreak of the Arab Spring, but at least now when this regime has been toppled. And it gives, it has a lot of ramifications for European but also Western policy vis-a-vis a whole array of other authoritarian countries, and by the way, in Europe's neighborhood. So we have to engage in a paradigm shift now, pursuing a policy that is much better able to support the aspirations of those societies in our immediate neighborhood than to engage in some kind of short-term stability deals with the autocrats.
Because what looked stable from the outside in Syria ever since 2020 was not stable. It was feeling like, people were assimilating. They were living in poverty, 90% of people in poverty. So this is not a concept now to look at the Middle East. I completely agree. And we have two countries that play a negative role right now, especially Turkey. I mean, it's Israel from the south. They are attacking. They are kind of disarming the whole state of Syria right now, out of the fear that this army or this military might fall into the hands of jihadis in Damascus. But we have Turkey in the north, who still play a negative role because with their own soldiers, the Syrian National Army that Maissun already mentioned, they are attacking the Kurdish forces in the northeast. And this is this kind of infighting that Syria does not need right now, which is hopeful is that the leader of the Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurdish forces, is in contact with HTS. So they really try to build up an alliance to rebuild Syria in a better future, what is negative, and this should be addressed by Western allies of Turkey to influence and to talk to President Erdogan, that he understands that his interests in Syria are already fulfilling themselves because refugees will go back from Turkey and Kurdish autonomy will not come out to play because they are supposed to be part of a federal new Syria.
Turkey, of course, a major player in all this. What about Iran? What can we expect from Tehran with respect to
There is great confusion and there is a shock of tremendous proportions, something that we haven't seen since the other very watershed moment, even globally, the 1979 Iranian Revolution. This is a historic moment. There's a lot of confusion. The Iranians were heavily surprised what was going on. They've probably realized after the takeover of Aleppo that they cannot really mobilize and save the Assad regime this time around. And it's a huge loss. So they cannot, the Iranians were hoping to rebuild Hezbollah once, also with the ceasefire and perhaps, in the wake of it. But now how can they do it without the land transit route via Syria? So the entire strategy of the Iranians has crumpled strategically in terms of power projection, but also in terms of leverage vis-a-vis different players. So all of that doesn't exist. Beyond that, the Iranians have invested a lot of money in Syria, probably at least $30 billion, probably more, with also fake credit lines or with Iranian oil deliveries to Syria. So they've lost a lot of money. So the Iranians are, this is a huge ideological problem for the regime because there is a lot of people, also some younger radicals, who actually, to tell the seniors that why didn't you, enter the war to save Assad?
One important player, very briefly, what role can Israel play here?
Israel is trying to use this moment, as I already mentioned. Israel is afraid of what comes next. They were quite happy with the Assad regime because they kept these Golan Heights quiet over the decades. There was never any attack from the Golan Heights because whatever pressure Syria wanted to take on Israel was managed through Hezbollah in South Lebanon. This was their axis. So what's happening now is it's not only the attacks, the bombardment of the Marine, for example, and these military assets of Syria, but they have entered the Golan Heights. They are already occupying the Golan Heights. They annexed them. So what they did is to build a new buffer zone. This is how they called it usually. And they went to Mount Hermon. This is the military strategic center of this area, because you can look all the way to Jerusalem, to Damascus, and into Lebanon. So they will not leave the Mount Morhawan. So this is a territorial change.
I have to come to the end very, very briefly. 1 year from now, will we see a democratic, peaceful Syria?
Not yet, but we will be on the right track to it.
What about you?
We don't know, but hopefully, and if we're going to see that, they're going to have a positive domino effect in the region and perhaps beyond.
What's your prediction?
Democracy takes more time after more than half a century of dictatorship. This will take time. I hope it's going to be more or less peaceful. This would be already good news.
Some encouraging thoughts there. Thank you very much to my panel. That's it from To The Point for today. We hope you found the discussion interesting. Do tell us what you think. If you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment right below here. And from me and my panel, thank you very much for watching. See you soon.